Hey everybody, Chris Gill here. Today we are looking at how to take a mono mix from boring to exciting using the built-in plugins, plugin effects right within your DAW. Let's jump in. So I was asked a little while ago, a few months ago, to record live music of a band at a youth conference. And we used a StudioLive 32 channel mixer. It's the Series 3. So doing that, we were able to multi-track the entire music set using their software Capture, and then I was able to bring that into Studio One later and mix it down. When I got this into Studio One, what I realized real quickly was everything was starting to sound real narrow, and I didn't really have the options of panning because, you know, there's only one electric guitar part, there's only one acoustic guitar part, there's only one of everything, basically. The only things that I could really pan were my overhead tracks. You know, I had a hi-hat and a cymbal microphone. And so what I kind of had to do was get creative with using the effects in Studio One, reverbs, choruses, delays, to make my sound bigger. And so let me play you a little bit here. This is kind of the mix that I arrived at before adding any of the reverbs or chorus effects, doublers, anything like that, so you can kind of hear where I was at. That's not bad. What I was really struggling with was, how do I get this to sound bigger? I know I have mono tracks, and panning is not really an option for me. So I kind of got creative with the effects, and this is the result that I ended up with. And then after we hear this, we'll kind of go through and talk about what I did for each one. Here it is without. With. Here's what we've got going on the drums. So here's my drum bus and all my drum tracks. And what I've got here is I am sending all of my drums to what I'm calling a 480 room. So let's take a look and see kind of what's going on in there. So here is the PreSonus plain old reverb. This is what comes with Studio One. I think it even comes with Artist. It is just the bare bones stock reverb. It's a very utilitarian kind of a reverb, but for tasks like this, it really just gets the job done. So here's what I've got going on, and we'll solo this reverb so you can kind of hear what's going on here with this particular reverb. Big fat reverb sound, and what I've done here is I've also added an EQ after the fact. Just roll off some of the low end, you know, some of those big super subwoofy lows, some of the top end, and then I've given it a pretty healthy boost right here at about 1.5K. And the reason I've done this is that's kind of right where that snare crack hits, and I really wanted that to come through that reverb send. So that's why I've kind of boosted that a little bit. So that's kind of a reverb that's being applied. Obviously, I'm sending the entire drum bus to that. So every single drum that's feeding this drum bus here is then being sent to this reverb. And so that kind of gives it a big arena rock feel, a big live performance feel. And I was very, very happy with that. So next we've got this snare verb. And this, you know, you say, well, you're already sending the snare, you know, via the drum bus to this big room reverb. Why do you need a separate snare reverb? Well, the snare was feeling just a little bit empty to me, a little bit hollow, and I really wanted it to stand out, especially for this particular track. I wanted when they hit that snare, I wanted to, you know, have that big decay. Also, with this room reverb here, I have this, and let's open them up so we can compare. So this is my snare reverb. Here is my room reverb. So my snare reverb is quite a bit wider. I have this width setting absolutely as wide as it will go. The height is almost the same. The size is actually almost the same. What's funny about this is I actually tweaked these completely independent of each other. The difference here is I'm using a medium hull setting for my drum bus, and I'm using just a room setting for my snare verb. So let's kind of hear what that snare verb sounds like. So quite a bit different than the room reverb. It's wider, it's got a shorter tail on it, and it really gives me that sense of width. So let's hear the snare tracks without the reverb send, and then I'll throw them in here in a minute. Yeah. So that, to me, it gives the snare more body. It also, again, gives it that width, so it really sounds like you're in a good drum room. So that was kind of the tricks, two tricks I used to get the drum sounding big, sounding thick, sounding like they've got a really good sense of stereo space. So the second thing I did was this loop. So let's listen to this loop right here at the beginning and just hear what's going on with it. Okay, so that pretty much carries through this whole song. It's a little percussive loop with kind of some drone pads, and I think they have like a little bit of organ pad that comes in at the end. So there's already a pretty healthy decay on there, but there's no width to it. It's just a mono track. That's what they were feeding me. So I created this, what I call loop space, again with the stock PreSonus room reverb, and I've got a size. I've got a pretty big size on this, 9.56. A height of 0.73, so not super tall, but the width pretty wide as well. I've got a pretty healthy pre-delay on here, and the length I've kicked up just a little bit to give it an extra tail. So let's listen to the loop without the space, and then I'll throw the space in after a couple bars, and you'll be able to hear the difference. Yeah, okay, so there's also those big, giant concert bass drum, in the distance kind of hit. And this loop space really brings that to life, really. So the biggest thing for me, and this was really hard, was the guitars. So the guitar player was using a Line 6 Helix, and it does sound fantastic. It really, really does. Again, however, I'm only getting a mono channel. So the way I combated that was to, again, you guessed it, I went straight for the room reverb. And then I also employed a second technique, which is this doubler using a chorus effect. We'll get into that in a minute, but what I really want to listen to first is just his guitar tone by itself. Beautiful lead line, great tone. There's a lot of delay on there. There's also a lot of reverb on there. So the trick with this was, what can I add to this so that I'm not muddying that sound up? I'm not taking anything away. I'm purely adding space. So the answer to that for me was I created this guitar reverb. I used the large hull, which is the biggest setting this reverb has. I gave it a really good width, moderate height. I didn't do much to the height. The size here, I've gone pretty good on this size. Little bit of pre-delay, and I've kept the length about the same. But let's listen to what just this one reverb does for that guitar sound. All this is doing is tickling the sides of your ears. So it's like, it's just adding this space around that guitar sound without actually encroaching on the reverb and delay he already had going on in his patch, which sounded great. I absolutely wanted to make sure I didn't destroy that. I should have mentioned earlier, the way I accomplished that was through this pre-delay. So This basically says, I'm not going to start my reverb tail until after 55 milliseconds have passed. What that did is it allowed his reverb, or his tone, his reverb, his delay to cut through before this ambiance started getting added. So in addition to this, so I did call this guitar verb. I was feeding some other things to it. Believe it or not, I was feeding a little bit of the bass guitar to it, and just a little bit, like half of what of everything else that's being fed to it. And the reason I did this, if you were to actually do a live recording on a mega sound system, that bass guitar is going to have some natural reverb in that room, and all the microphones that are in that room are going to pick that up. This is just kind of my way of emulating that. So here is the bass guitar without the reverb. And let's add it in. One more time. Again, not anything super drastic. We're just trying to get some sound on the left and right sides of our mix here. So now that we've looked at that, again, so we did the exact same thing with the acoustic guitar and the piano. I've even fed a little bit of the piano to this guitar verb, which is really just kind of an overall ambience. The next and very important thing I did here is this doubler. So I had this nice round sound, kind of, you know, this reverb kind of lightly touching the left and right channels of the mix, but I needed something to actually give it a little more presence in the mix to make it feel like it was recorded stereo. Let's listen to those together and hear the difference here. Night and day. I am really, really loving how that sounds. So again, we've got the exact same thing going on here with the rest of the instruments, and all together, just these, and I only have these 1, 2, what do we have? 3, 4, 5 effect sends, and it completely transforms the mix. So let's listen to this intro again, kind of from the top here. I'm going to start with the effects out, and then when we get to this point right here, I'm going to pop them in, and I think you'll hear the difference for sure. Night and day. I mean, really, the difference is pretty incredible. So that is an easy way to get a simple live recording that's going to be mostly mono to sound bigger, to give it that depth, to give it that warmth. The big thing I noticed right away is actually how much bigger the snare drum gets, and that's was incredibly important on this particular song, this mix, to have that big, wide, fat snare drum with that big, long decay. Again, this is Chris Gill. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.